What does Dansville, the Lion King, the Seligmann brothers, and the Panama Canal have in common? No hay sorpresas. Another episode of the Gilded Age. Hey everyone, this is D Movie Man, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today, of course, I'm coming to you all with another episode of The Gilded Age, Season 1, Episode 5, Charity Has Two Functions. This episode was directed by Salli Richardson-Whitfield and written by Julian. We open up this episode with Gladys attempting to sneak out of the house shortly before she is caught by Bertha. And George really does not understand why Bertha insists on keeping their only daughter cooped up inside the house, as opposed to bringing her into society. But as far as Bertha is concerned, it'll all make sense once she finds the right person for Gladys. We also learn that Clara Barton has opened her first branch of the Red Cross in Dansville the previous year. She's holding a meeting there to announce it to everyone, and all her supporters will be traveling to attend. And Marian herself is also hoping to attend. Agnes seems somewhat hesitant. Surely she isn't against charity. Not quite. Agnes says that charity has two functions. The first is to raise funds for the less fortunate, and the second is to provide a ladder into society for those who do not belong there. And we all know how Agnes feels about that. But she does give Marian her blessing, as long as Peggy accompanies her. Speaking of Peggy, we find out that one of her stories, Alone in the City, has been published in the New York Globe. Marian is excited for Peggy and congratulates her, but it's clear that things are still not 100% between them, given what happened in Brooklyn. Marian does understand that she was wrong, but she also realizes that she did it more so out of curiosity, because even Tom appears to know more about Peggy's life than she does. As far as Peggy is concerned, Marian does have a good heart, but Peggy runs her own life, and she wants to make that very, very clear. Later, we find out that George and Bertha intend on inviting Archie Baldwin over for dinner. Both Larry and Gladys find this very suspicious, given how very recently Gladys was punished for even reaching out to him. But for whatever reason, they figure it's time to meet him, and they plan on inviting him over next Friday. As Marian leaves the house, she runs into Mrs. Scott, who has come to see Peggy, but Peggy is out at the moment. They have a brief conversation, and ultimately Mrs. Scott wants Peggy to live in Brooklyn. Over on this side of town, she would only have a half-life. But in Brooklyn, she could have her own husband, her own family, and be able to walk through front doors instead of back entrances. But only time will tell if Peggy will make that decision herself. Next, we see Armstrong leaving for her day off, and we see her arriving at a tenement on a very rundown side of town. Which in itself I found interesting because given the boom in population and the mass migration to areas like New York, a lot of the reality as far as housing and living conditions, it tended to look just like this. She enters one of the apartments, which is dark, gloomy, and in disrepair, and we realize that she's visiting her mother, who is mostly bedridden. She's brought her food, and she's there to help clean up the apartment and even make her bed. But we also see that her mother, whether it be old age, present circumstances, or otherwise, has a very snide and unpleasant demeanor. And despite the fact that her daughter is there to help, she seems to insist on making things even more difficult for her. Later, when Armstrong returns to the Van Ryn household, Mrs. Bauer remarks on how lucky she is to be able to get out and spoil herself. Armstrong simply agrees with her, despite the sadness looming in her eyes. Later, we see Marian discussing the impending meeting with Mr. McAllister with her two aunts. They don't care too much for him, as he seems to spend the majority of his life either puffing people up or putting people down. And as far as Mrs. Astor, well, she's like rain, a fact of life that we all must deal with. Back at the Russells, we see that Adelheid, who is currently a housemaid, now has aspirations to be Gladys's new lady's maid, given how much she's learned and studied from Turner herself. Like a nun in a convent. Mrs. Bruce says that Turner is far from a nun. I can guarantee you that. Later, we see Mrs. Bruce advocating for Adelheid to Gladys. Gladys is totally fine with Adelheid taking on the position, just as long as she has no more governesses. She also tells Mrs. Bruce that she's the first person who's ever asked her opinion on any decision concerning herself, which is unfortunate. But thankfully, Bertha also agrees to promote Adelheid. Let me say that I think that the costume design for the show in general has been really on point, but for some reason this episode, I was like, wow. There were just so many different looks that kept catching my eye, and I just kept noticing the craftsmanship and the little details, the intricacies, and things like that. I was so here for it. And I really do have such an appreciation and respect for costume design and costume designers because it is not easy by any means, especially considering that we are replicating these looks from bygone eras with all these pieces, these bustles, these buttons. I mean, it's a lot going on. Our costume designer is Kasia Walika Maimon, and she and her team made 5,000, count them, 5,000 looks in total for this entire season of the Gilded Age. Now, she does have 65 people on her team, but still, like, I can't even begin to imagine the hours, the time, the energy that went into doing that. But I can absolutely say that they have done an excellent job. And case in point, in this scene, I really couldn't help noticing Marian's gold dress with that royal blue lace embroidery on the top and that pattern. I was like, man, that just really, I could not take my eyes off of that. At Mrs. Fane's luncheon, we see that Bertha has arrived and also Tom, as Marian herself has wrangled up an invitation for him. And we learn that Bertha will also be traveling with the other ladies to Dansville to hear Miss Barton speak. Since the journey is so far, they'll all have to stay overnight. And it's funny because even today, Dansville is about 5 hours away from New York, even by car. So I can only imagine how long it took to get there back then. And finally, the man of the hour himself, Mr. Ward McAllister, makes his entrance. And played by none other than Nathan Lane. Now, Nathan Lane has had an extensive career in film, television, and especially the stage. But because I treasure so many actors and actresses that I've grown up with, I personally appreciate Nathan Lane for his role as Timon in The Lion King, Ernie in Mouse Hunt, and Snowbell in Stuart Little. And who better to play this role but him? He's introduced to everyone in the room, but he is most excited to speak to Bertha because he is ready to hear all the gossip about her husband's railroad empire. From where Mr. McAllister stands, Bertha is already in great standing with her chef and her home and her wealth. But the guest list? Not quite up to snuff. But he plans on mending that personally. Bertha is delighted to think of Mr. McAllister as her protector. But he tells her that, pretty soon, I think you'll be protecting me. Oh my gosh, man, I tell you, Nathan Lane is eating up this role. We then see Turner leaving the Russell household, and when she accidentally trips, who should help her recover but Oscar Van Ryn? I was just like, whew, this is not good. Turner notices that Oscar hasn't been by the house in a while, and she knows why. Unfortunately, he played that whole alderman situation wrong because he assumed that George wouldn't survive the scandal. She's also aware that Oscar has his eye on Gladys. But as she leaves, Oscar requests her presence in the park in an hour. He has an idea that she could be very helpful to him. Is this a match made in heaven? No. I think someplace much, much hotter. Next, we see Agnes and Peggy having a conversation after Peggy does some more letter dictation for her. Agnes recognizes that Peggy is a determined young woman, despite the obstacles in her way, her being a woman of color being two of them. And this is in stark contrast to Marian, whose determination is also balanced out with recklessness. Then Agnes requests that Peggy not spy on Marian, but to please keep her safe. And it's very clear that Agnes has a certain respect level for Peggy that she does not have for Marian. And Josh Angeles, which is such a cool name by the way, made a really great comment in my last recap that I pinned, which was basically emphasizing that same thing. We then see everyone arriving at Dansville for Miss Barton's speaking engagement, and who should also be there but the always positive and always pleasant Mrs. Morris. And what positive affirmation does she have to offer us today? She recognizes that the murderer's wife is trying to buy herself a place in society and that Aurora is more than happy to take her money. And Aurora's just like, do you really feel like you're honoring your husband's memory by behaving like a child? Then Mrs. Morris tells her that she's been defiled, and Bertha marches right up like, are you saying that my presence has defiled Mrs. Fane? But that conversation is interrupted as Miss Barton announces that although she had plans to open one branch of the Red Cross, they will now be opening 3, thanks to the generous donation of Mrs. Russell. After her announcement, Miss Barton is introduced to Peggy as a writer for the New York Globe, and she has a question for her article. Will the Red Cross extend help to all who suffer, regardless of race? Miss Barton responds and says that they will turn away no one who is in need. And once again, the dark cloud that is Mrs. Morris is offended and appalled by Peggy's presence. And when Miss Barton overhears that, she says, please, feel free to join us. They visit an area where a burn victim is being treated, and we can see that is not sitting well with Bertha's stomach. Mrs. Morris finds this ironic. She has blood on her hands, yet she shrieks at the sight of it. And I'm still very much confused. It's like she wants to aim all her anger and frustration at Bertha, but it is you and your husband who created this entire situation and the circumstances that followed. So I have 0 tears to give. Later, we see everyone eating at the Dansville Hotel. Mercifully, Mrs. Morris has left early, and although Bertha has enjoyed her time, she will have to take the early train home the next morning. After Bertha excuses herself, Miss Barton makes it clear that she's no simpleton. She knows that Bertha is using the charity ladder to climb into the ballrooms of New York, but she personally is still grateful that she chose her charity to be that ladder. She also asks if anyone is familiar with Mrs. Chamberlain. Aurora lies and says no. Mrs. Barton is fully aware of her reputation, but once Marian mentions that she does know her, she asks if Marian would interest her in the cause. And see, right there, that is a huge difference between Miss Barton and the other women. She is not blind to the reality of the situation, but she understands the benefit and she prioritizes her organization and healthcare and the impact of that over the rules. This is chess, not checkers. We see Marian and Tom having another conversation, and still, I'm hearing the same questionable details. Tom is attending the Stuyvesant Ball next Thursday, and Marian lets him know, you do know that this all could come to an end one day. He says maybe, but we'd still be invited to parties. Well, that's assuming you throw your lot in with me. She says even if that were the case, we couldn't expect to live the way they live. I noticed that Tom did not respond to that, but he wishes her a good night. Although it is also clear that he was hoping for something else. And he confirms that by proceeding to immediately slob her down. I was like, oh my. Well, that is before Peggy walks in on them. Peggy is shocked, but not surprised, because she's had experience in that same arena. She reveals that there was a man she once fell for named Elias Finn. He was a stock boy at her father's pharmacy. She says that he changed her life, but that her parents didn't approve. And as far as the kiss is concerned, she tells Marian that she should only be offended if Tom thinks he can have her easily, but not if he simply wants her just as much as she wants him. And my question would be, is that all that he wants? Back at the Russells, we see Monsieur Baudin having a conversation with Turner. He recognizes that, despite her being in the dumps so consistently, her mood seems to have brightened considerably. Turner says she's simply taking his advice. He told her himself that if there was something she was displeased with, to simply change it. And now she intends to have some fun. Nothing good can come of this. Later, we see Marian reading Peggy's piece on Clara Barton and the Red Cross, and it would appear that Peggy has captured everything that could possibly be said in her write-up. Marian once again brings up that unfortunate Brooklyn situation, and she realizes that she's not used to seeing or being around women like Peggy or Miss Barton. Back in Doylestown, most women simply settled into the role of wife and mother, but here Peggy is carving out her own path. She also asks Peggy if she's truly happy, given what her mother said. Peggy reinforces that this is family business, but Marian herself knows what it's like to have family suddenly taken away from her. And certainly, Peggy wouldn't want the burden of regret to fall on her shoulders were her father to suddenly pass away. And Peggy says that not even that could be heavier than what she's carrying now. I was like, what is it? I need to know. Like, I know we're going to find out soon, but I'm just like, what could possibly be worse than a parent passing away? Like, what went down? Like, I need to know. We see Archie Baldwin at the Russells for dinner, and the conversation appears to be going fairly well. Afterwards, George has a one-on-one conversation with Archie, who is clearly determined to marry Gladys. But despite the initial tone of the conversation, there's more beneath the surface. He mentions the Seligmann brothers and how they have an interest in digging a new canal in Panama. He's spoken to Abraham Seligmann about Archie, and he is prepared to take Archie on as a broker with excellent prospects. He could be a rich man in just a few years. But the caveat is that after sending a final letter to Gladys, he must never communicate with her again. Oh, and if he refuses, then George will ensure that he never works in the financial sector of their economy ever again. I was kind of like, now, I understood that last situation. But here, I don't know. I was kind of seeing that dark side, that villainous side kind of come out. Like, I understand the situation. I understand what you're trying to do, but it's like, George, what's going on here? So Archie has no real choice here. Be a rich man or be a ruined man. Very simple. And before he leaves, he tells Gladys that she's one of the best girls he's known or will ever know. And naturally, Gladys is devastated because from her standpoint, she loved Archie. Bertha understands that, but she promises that she'll never ask anything of her that isn't for her benefit in the end. She also tells Gladys that she wants the whole world for her. And as her mother, she will do anything to get it for her. I can appreciate that. But I have a sneaking suspicion that in the end, this is not going to benefit Gladys the way that Bertha thinks it will. Right as Archie leaves, Mr. Clay arrives with terrible news. It appears that there's been a railroad accident just outside Millbourne, Pennsylvania. 3 are dead so far, with plenty more injured. George then asks Bertha to wire Miss Barton and ask her to come to Millbourne. George realizes that this crash can potentially bring both him and his company down. And as only Bertha can, she says, then make sure you survive it. And that closes out episode 5. Charity has 2 functions. Another solid episode. Not as much to say here for me, but I am enjoying the dynamics of the story. I'm enjoying the progression. I'm enjoying learning more about everyone, especially the staff. Like, compared to what I said previously, I'm just like, we have really expanded upon that. And I hope we get more from each person, from each household, as far as the staff and the servants' quarters and all that. I am all here for that. Still curious to learn about Peggy's backstory, ready to learn the secret. And then as far as Gladys is concerned, I think that her story is shaping up to emulate something very specific in history. I won't say what that is yet, but if it's what I think it is, then Gladys might have a really rough road ahead for her. And as always, please feel free to leave your thoughts below. Let me know what you thought of the episode, everything that went down, the characters, what are you expecting, what are you hoping for, what shocked you, what surprised you. Please feel free to let me know down below. So, once again, this is D, Movie Man, signing off, and I'll see you at the movies.